I don't think, and there we are live. We are live. It is International Workers' Day or May Day here at Oscar Grant Plaza in sunny downtown Oakland. I'm Kat Petru, and I'll be co-hosting with Dennis Bernstein, who's taking some notes to my right. Today we join you, as I said, on International Workers' Day or May Day from Oscar Grant Plaza, where laborers and working people combating gentrification and climate crisis, seeking healthcare and racial, gender, and migrant justice in the workplace and in our communities, are gathering to disrupt business as usual, as we do. This broadcast is a collaboration between the KPFA First Voice Apprenticeship Program, Workweek Radio, and Bright Path Video. Shout out to all of you. Thank you for everyone's hard work. You can keep up to date, I just want to tell you and I'll remind you, keep up to date on today's actions and actions around the world at kpfa.org and on our Facebook page created by us and We Rise Production, which is called Pacifica Radio May Day Broadcast. And you can share that with your friends and post your own stuff. Thank you all so much. That song that you just heard, I don't know what it was called, so if we get it, oh, Billy Bragg, There Is a Power in a Union. That was the song. And now we're honored to be joined by Janabi Pareja, chairperson of Paui's East Bay People's Association of Workers and Immigrants. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Sorry, my mic got dropped for a sec. Can you tell us about Paui's and what brings you out here today, please?
Sure. Paui's East Bay was actually created right after the 9/11 attacks. There's roughly about 6,500 Filipinos that leaves the countries every day. So Paui's was actually created when there were Filipinos that was working at the airport. But due to the Patriot Act, was all laid off because they weren't U.S. citizens. So after that, we saw that it was a need to be able to organize Filipinos, especially when dealing with such anti-immigrant policies that we have here in the United States. And one thing that came after that was actually an effort of joining or bringing 3 different organizations here in the East Bay, here in the Bay Area, San Francisco, San Jose, and here in the East Bay. And now we are fighting for rights and social welfare for different Filipinos here in the East Bay, providing Know Your Rights training to any kind of collective or community support for families and members here.
Well, the Filipino community has a long history of union organizing. People
Yes.
do not realize, and the most militant part of union organizing, and people don't realize the role that the Filipinos played in the United Farm Workers. In the creation, there would have been no United Farm Workers. And, for instance, Cesar Chavez had to be hipped to the fact that they couldn't do this. You want to talk about that? Remind people about that?
Yeah, and I think what comes really great in time is that we, as part of our organization with Migrante USA, is that there's actually doing a tour right now with one of the chairperson of Kilusan Mayo Uno, which is a union organization in the Philippines that's doing their tour around the United States. They just left here in the Bay Area in the East Bay. We just finished their tour here. Now they're in Chicago for May Day. It's a historic place to do so. And I think what's really great to see the connections between union work, especially the Filipino community, it's the way why I think folks have to leave their country to begin with. And I think when people see the connections of labor export policy and migration or forced migration, people have to rise up and uplift workers' rights, especially if they see any kind of injustices that's happening in their workplace.
Yeah, am I on? Yes. And I really appreciate you naming that link between the sort of systems or forces that push folks to migrate, the reason there is a Filipino diaspora now, right? And then also the same, it's like 2 sides of the same coin, keeping folks oppressed here. Can you speak more to that history?
Yeah, of course. I think it's as easy as that. Why wouldn't you want a very expensive labor force when you can get cheap labor abroad? And I think this is where you see the correlations about like, well, you know, you pit immigrants community together saying that, you know, one immigrant population is taking jobs from a difference. But in reality, what is actually thriving in the situations is capitalism.
Yes.
Capitalism, it's the main force of pitting like communities of colors like together to be like, well, this person is doing it in a cheaper like labor, so why don't we just go with them? But in reality, I think it's the exploitations of our immigrant like labor force who does like the brunt of the work like here. So
I think I also was just thinking like we're younger, right? And like I didn't know that much about the history of International Workers' Day. So I'm curious too, like how that was or wasn't passed down to you, and like I'm curious about the intergenerational, what kind of intergenerational organizing is going on within Pauis and yes. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was exposed to youth organizing like here in Oakland, but what really like made that connection to me is like I was born in the Philippines. Why did my parents like move here to begin with? And asking those questions that I was when I was younger embarrassed to ask, like, Mom and Dad, why did you have to work here, or why did you have to be a caregiver and work 6 or 7 days of the week and I don't get to see you like at home? And I think it's when we start asking those questions and at the same time uplifting those like stories, it's when you get like the community to understand those marginalized and oppressed like voices that we don't usually get in media. And I think it's good to see like radio hosts such as KPFA who's doing this kind of work. It's good to see different kind of coalitions or Mayday uplifting this that typically not all mainstream medias are covering.
For sure.
And Dennis Bernstein here. We're delighted to be broadcasting from Oscar Grant Plaza downtown Oakland. It's May Day. I'm Dennis Bernstein. I've been talking for hours, so I'm a little bit tongue-tied here. But the other thing that I want to ask you about is that there's a lot happening in the home country. There's a real struggle going on there. You've got a monster for a president who really makes Trump look mild, and that's saying some. But he is a mass murderer and proud of it. And the resistance and the politicians who are trying to hold him accountable are under attack.
Yeah, and what's so interesting when you ask that question right now is that the Philippines is currently undergoing it's election season right now in the Philippines, and it's so interesting that it's coming out of like your mouth are saying that compared to our some president here in the United States to our the Philippines president means there's such a strong correlation to it. Is that like for us when you think about that there is the Philippines is actually, how do you put it this way? Philippines takes about $4.7 billion of remittances of labor forces from abroad. So it's one of their major like key like goodies. So when people really think about like, oh, what is the thing that the Philippines is really known for? Is it about pineapples or like bananas? Right. It's people, and they rely on that. So it's interesting when you say that now it's actually he passed this anti-contractualization like law, but based on his presidency, it's all been like lies and false promises.
Right.
And then based on that, there's supposed to be like I think 1 billion pesos aid for migrants abroad, but yet we don't see that in the consulate. We don't see that in the embassy. We don't see that on how it's actually showcasing, especially with the different kind of trafficking cases, wage theft cases that's happening within our community, not just here in the East Bay or Oakland, but all over the world. So.
Yeah.
Dennis Bernstein here, and delighted to be with Kat, downtown Oakland, Oscar Grant Plaza. This is May Day. This is a very special May Day, Kat, because we are dealing with a president who, you know, he didn't start all the trouble, but his spin is terrifying.
Right, and actually, I was just thinking, listening to you speak, and again, our guest is Janabi Pareja from Pauis, which is People's Association of Workers and Immigrants, East Bay. And you mentioned like one of the issues is capitalism, is globalized capitalism. And so I want to echo what Dennis is saying. Of course, this didn't start with Trump. Actually, it started with colonization, with conquest, and there was a concomitant rise of colonization and enslavement, and also capitalism in the continent of Europe. And so one thing that I'm really appreciating about what you're sharing, and also what folks have been sharing throughout this broadcast, is to name, I think also for me, when I first heard about IWD, International Workers' Day, I was like, well, it seems like a really white issue. Like unionization, the way that I learned it was kind of white. And in fact, people of color, women, gender nonconforming folks have been centering in this struggle since the beginning. The reason we're fighting about, I don't know what's happening, about our rights as beings, as living, breathing beings who aren't machines, is because of these deeply entrenched systems of violence and domination. And I appreciate too the way that Powys, and in general, like as Dennis was saying too, with Larry Itliong and United Farm Workers, how so many Filipino organizers and radicals and activists know how important solidarity is in these movements, right?
Yeah, and I totally agree, because I think you can't speak about the liberations of just Filipino people and think that everyone will be liberated. You have to think about the liberations of all oppressed people, because you can't think about me being free yet my brothers and sisters are not. So I think there's the strength, like history of what we even see here at May Day. Here's the drums.
Hey.
But here's what we even see, that it's not just like, one race or one ethnic like body that's here. We see like multi-ethnic like folks that's bringing around in these issues and amplifying it in such a good way.
And at this point in time, we also can't talk about our freedom without talking about how our work, our labor is coming from the earth. And the way that the exploitation of human bodies is also an exploitation of so many other beings on this planet and our home. We're just calling up the spirits of these drums right now. I'm curious if there's more, and I'm not sure if we've got another person waiting to jump in. Go for
Why
it,
don't we
Dennis.
thank you, because we're not going to compete with the drums.
Totally.
These are indigenous drummers. This is an expression, a spiritual expression, and we're not going to stand in the way. It looks like maybe we have another moment. Thank you for joining us.
I want to ask before you leave, though, how can folks connect with your work?
Sure. You can actually find us like online on Facebook as well too, but anyhow, it's East Bay. We're also part of different coalitions such as Third World Resistance and Migrante USA. So,
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
Beautiful.
having me.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Again, that was Janabi Pareja, chairperson of Powys East Bay People's Association of Workers and Immigrants. Thank you, Janabi. Such a pleasure to speak with you.
And just to say, in terms of the Philippines and U.S. covert warfare, because right now we're watching it happen again in Venezuela.
Yeah.
The Philippines, the United States practiced, their first mission was the Philippines, and a search and destroy, where they began to use this search and destroy method, which is destroy anything and everything in their way. This was, they called them free fire zones, and they perfected this in the Philippines, where they would wipe out entire communities, send a vicious and frightening message to the people: do not resist the United States or you're going to be slaughtered. So the current president, even though politicians in the United States say, oh, what a creep, and he is a viciously dangerous mass murderer, the U.S. government supported with Philippines and with corrupt dictators for way too long. So it's important to see there's that history left over.
Yeah.
And when we think about the Philippines, Jack Heyman, I have not seen you in a long time. Welcome. Dennis Bernstein here with Kat. Welcome to our international 24-hour live stream, kpfa.org broadcast. Good to have you with us. Do you know Jack Heyman? He's a terrific,
Hi, Jack.
long-time
Nice to meet you.
union activist. He doesn't mess around.
But I don't know your name.
I'm Kat Petru. I'm a
Okay.
graduate of the First Voice apprenticeship program and one of the co-founders of We Rise Production. So we're helping with all the social media, getting this up so y'all can see it. Pleasure to
Good.
meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too.
Ask Jack a question about why unions are important.
Hey, Jack. Why are unions important?
Well, I just came in hearing the last part of what Dennis was talking about, U.S. imperialism.
Yes.
And unions are here to protect workers against the attacks and everyday diminution of our working standards. And without unions, we would have no voice in the workplace.
And what has been the plan for today in the context of a president who has demonstrated a lifetime of hatred against black people, brown people, the poor, the disinherited, a president who was willing to, as a businessman, rip off workers, destroy worker rights, and so on and so forth? You must have something special to say about all that.
Well, you talked about U.S. imperialism. I'll talk about U.S. capitalism, and Trump epitomizes that. We took this May Day to focus on the greed of capitalists in California. With Fisher, who owns the Gap, he also owns the A's, wants to take port property where we have good-paying union jobs and turn it into a baseball stadium, move the Oakland A's from East Oakland over here, establish high-priced condominiums in East Oakland, and also build them here in West Oakland, in Jack London Square. And we're going to stop that. If it takes strike action, then that's what the ILWU has.
They call it affordable housing. I think it's affordable housing for anybody who makes more than $500,000.
Yeah, I mean, this whole gamut of promises, these gratuitous promises, it's nothing new. When sports centers are built around this country, and I'll give you the example of Staples Center in LA, or the one in New York where the Nets in Atlantic Yards.
And then in Michigan, there was just a boondoggle where they lied.
Yeah.
You know, they were going to have a big stadium, development of downtown. All they did was develop the stadium.
And that's exactly what I'm getting at, Dennis, because what they do is they make these promises about affordable housing and jobs, and it never comes to fruition. And so we're here to make sure that doesn't happen. The point is this port here is the third largest in California, but it's the fifth largest container port in the entire country. We ship out all the produce from the Central Valley. We ship out the containers and, computers and computer parts from Silicon Valley. Last year alone, and then of course we get the imports. We have more imports than we do exports. The imports come mainly from China, Japan, Korea. And last year, the port boasted the highest ever volume in cargo. We had 2.5 million containers. Now here's the key thing. They charge a tariff for each of these containers, $88 per container. That amounts to millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm glad we're protesting here in front of City Hall, because Mayor Libby Schaaf used to be the Director of Public Affairs for the Port of Oakland before she got this job. So she knows very well that Oakland is a rich city through our port. And these tariffs should be contributed, some of the revenue should come to the city, because we just had a teacher strike. Why? Because the school board is saying they just don't have the money to, they have to close schools, they have to privatize schools, they can't give smaller classroom sizes. They say it's all about money. Well, we have money in the port, and that should be coming into the city to help the city's budget. They do it in the port of Long Beach, which is the second largest port in the country.
Right.
We should be doing it here in Oakland,
Right.
and not just providing for schools, but we can provide for housing for the homeless
Absolutely.
people that are living under the freeways. That's a shame. But that's what capitalism has come to in this country.
It's like a false, what is that word? Oh, crap. Not poverty, but scarcity, like a false sense of scarcity. There actually are plenty of resources. It's just a matter of how they're managed and how they're dispersed. I wanted to share with folks, just because I'm sure everyone can hear these amazing drums, that it's Danza Azteca by Huey Papaloto. I may be saying saying
That's
that wrong.
the drums.
That's who's
Let's
organizing.
listen to the drums a little bit. Come on.
There's dancing. It's all in front of the big truck, organized by Oakland Sin Fronteras. They're the folks who really, really got this together. Thank you so much, Jack, for being with us.
Pleasure to be here. I just wanted to give a shout out, if I can, to Angela Davis. Angela
Sure.
was supposed to be here for May Day.
But she's been in D.C., right?
But she had to be in Washington, D.C. Some of you may have heard her earlier this morning on KPFA. When,
On Democracy Now,
Amy,
probably.
Amy Goodman's
Right.
Democracy Now.
Because she's
And-
supporting Congresswoman Ilhan
Ilhan,
Omar.
exactly.
Right, because of all of the hate and violence that's been targeted at her. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you want to say about Angela Davis? And I think we have another guest coming on shortly.
Oh.
You wanted to say something about Angela Davis.
Well, yeah, she, because she couldn't be here, she did send solidarity messages. And one of the points that Angela hit on very strongly was that this society is a society of inequalities. It's kind of like Anatole France said a few hundred years ago that in all its majesty, the laws in this country allow the rich and the poor to sleep under bridges. Well, now we're sleeping under the freeways, and this
Yeah.
disparity in wealth is just getting worse and worse. And Angela addressed that. And she said that the tariffs that come out of this port should be used for social services. People should not be living under the freeways or out in the streets or in the parks. They should have a decent place to live.
Right.
And this society can afford that.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you so much. I think it's about. I think.
Thank you, Jack. Amy, appreciate it.
I think, sorry, before, Dennis, you called someone up, but we do have another guest lined up. So maybe he'll come, right. So again,
Have a seat,
that
please.
was Jack Heyman of the Longshore
Let's
Union.
get them both. Join us, please. Come on in. Come on in.
Those two folks, we
Hey,
got this.
come on.
Stay with us, people.
All right, come on, join us.
All right. Well, again, you just heard the Danza Azteca drummers by Huey
All right, here we go.
Papalotl.
Have a seat, please.
And we are getting a few guests lined up. I
All right.
thank you for your patience. I think they've got it.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, we'll get everyone on. We still have about half an hour left in the broadcast. And
Okay.
again, just to remind folks, you're listening to us here at Oscar Grant Plaza in Oakland, California, occupied Ohlone territory, Hootchin. I wanted to say that earlier because it's so important as we recognize the legacies of the violence and oppression we're fighting against, to honor the fact that this is also colonized, stolen land. I'm Kat Petru, one of your co-hosts. I'm with the First Voice Apprenticeship Program and We Rise Production. And shout out to all my fellow producers, folks on social media, folks on the board. Thank you so much. And John behind the camera. And I'm here with Dennis Bernstein. And are you Edward Escobar?
That's correct.
You are Edward Escobar. And Jesse?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Welcome. Thank you for being part of this broadcast. Can you please tell us which organization you're with and what brings you here today?
Well, my name is Edward Escobar. I'm the founder of the Alliance for Independent Workers, the hashtag Drivers Unite National Movement. And we're here in collaboration with the ILWU. We are on
International
Shore Workers Union, yes, and we're on the committee to create this wonderful event here for worker solidarity in the International Workers' Day today.
Thank you. And Jesse?
Yeah, I'm a Uber driver, and I was sexually harassed on 2018. And when I report this to Uber, they said they were going to just not match me with the driver again until I wanted more done to it, so that guy would never do it again, maybe do it to a kid or something.
Yeah,
and I never got a response, and I talked to Edward.
We
Wow.
actually, he had a news coverage last year. It was the New Year's Eve Uber driver sexually assaulted, and that came out on NBC and Telemundo. So we were able, through the Alliance for Independent Workers Drivers Unite movement, to get that done for him, to get the word out, because these things are happening left and right, and the driver's narrative is not being heard. So it's our job to bring transparency to what's really going on, as corporations are putting profits before people, and that's at a cost to society.
Absolutely.
So are you working on a unionization program? Are you organizing? Where is that battle now?
We're
Because
working
Uber
on
and Lyft are out of control.
Beyond, yes, that's definitely. We're working on unification because that's the first step for anything. You have people that say, hey, you should unionize. Well, we need to unify first. You should have a strike. Well, we need to unify first. Maybe you should develop your own app as drivers. We need to unify first. That is always the first step in anything.
Do you need to unify with the taxi cab drivers who have been devastated by Uber and Lyft? Is it time for all drivers to get together and have a union?
That's why #DriversUnite is about uniting all drivers.
Right.
It is a call to action. It's not stating drivers united. We're saying call to action. Drivers must unite.
Because it's not the driver's fault that this is the kind of economy we live in. So I really respect that. And I want to name, Jesse, thank you for speaking out and sharing your story. It takes courage, so much courage to do that in the rape culture, in the culture of violence and sexual assault that we live in. So I just wanted to name that and say thank you.
Yeah, Jesse, particularly because being Hispanic, there's much more blowback within our Hispanic community. When a person comes out, and especially a male Hispanic, the day following the news reports, there was a lot of blowback in Hispanic news radio, questioning a lot of things that were just very derogatory towards Jesse, and he was very courageous in standing up.
Yeah.
Jesse, you want to talk a little bit more about your struggle?
Yeah, that was New Year's Eve 2018. I was driving, pick up a pool with a lady named Rika and a guy named Victor around 3 o'clock in the morning. When I dropped the lady off, the guy said, oh, the lady got off. He was so excited because he got off, and I said, what's wrong with this guy? He started touching me, grabbing right here my groin, and I took the hand off, and then I said, hey, I want to give you a job, And I said, you know what, man, I like women. And he kept touching me, and said, you never had a man do it to you. And you're going to like it. I said, you know what, keep your hands off me. And the guy tried to kiss me and everything. And I guess I used to fight a lot. And I know if I would have hit the guy, I would probably go to jail or something. I got a police report file. I'm just trying to find a lawyer that would do it. And also, like you said, I feel bad for the taxi drivers, okay? Because right now the wages are so low because they're overcrowding the market. Before the taxis can compete with us because the prices were a little bit higher, now they got about 80,000 Uber drivers in San Francisco, which is
It's oversaturating the market.
saturating the market, and the paying was less than $10 an hour. Okay, and I've been calling the governor of San Francisco, the governor of California, Newton. I've been calling in the Congress. I've been calling Mayor of Oakland, Mayor of San Francisco, and all the mayors around the Bay Area, San Jose, to do something about it.
Yeah, it's
especially
really,
the Newton.
It's really important that we unify because we have strength in numbers. We have 3 million plus drivers in the U.S. alone when you're talking about Uber, Lyft, and unifying that base. But our thing is beyond the app-based drivers, the Uber, Lyft drivers. We're looking at unifying all drivers across all transport sectors. So that's including taxi, limo, livery, and we're also working with the labor movement, which is the truckers. And that's a new approach because that's never been done before.
And I wanted to say, I said this kind of economy, but I realized the term I was looking for is the gig economy, which has no security whatsoever.
Yeah, the gig economy is a third of the workforce. In the next couple of years, they're projecting it'll be 40% of the workforce. By 2027, they state that it should be 50% of the workforce.
And it makes sense because there are so many obstacles for so many of us to get other kinds of jobs, whether it's papers, documented, undocumented, prison, etc. There's so many barriers. So it's like we got to pay our rent, we got to pay for our kids, we got to buy food, etc., etc., etc. So
it's a struggle, but here's the thing: is the corporations are taking advantage of this desperation, and you'll see their specific recruitment when it's targeted towards immigrants, low income, minorities, seniors, disabled, veterans. So this is a laundry list of folks that are soft targets that are used and abused and normally kicked to the curb by corporations because these folks don't know how or where to have their voices heard in unity. So that's what we're providing them.
Right.
The Alliance for Independent Workers.
Alliance for Independent Workers. And the last comment I wanted to say, and then please interject, is as far as I imagine for some folks hearing Jesse's story is triggering. or something like that. And I've done a lot of work around this, and I wanted to give a shout out to the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. They do some amazing work dealing with crises of assault and abuse.
Right, and beyond that, you're looking at the Uber Lyft IPOs. In New York alone, already 9 drivers have committed suicide. In San Francisco, a lot of taxi drivers have died from workers' exhaustion just sitting in their vehicles waiting for a ride. And there was even one individual who took a header off the top of the parking structure at San Francisco Airport. This is how bad it is, and it's getting worse.
All right, well, we thank both of you for joining us on this special May Day broadcast. It's kpfa.org. Final comment?
Yeah, final comment. There's going to be on the May 8th. They're asking for a strike. I'm not asking all the Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. I'm asking to turn the app off. Don't work on the 8th.
May 8th.
Don't work May 8th.
You're calling for a
and
strike.
also calling for the governors, the representative, I call it District 11, the District of the Tenderloin, to make this matter urgent.
Well, we from the Alliance for Independent Workers are calling for protests, rallies, demonstrations on that day. We believe that ineffective strikes through lack of unity will not benefit drivers. So we want unity in rallies, protests, demonstration. This was what we encourage and stand behind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
both.
Offline on the 8th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
So-
you, go on, please.
So you are listening to the KPFA Mayday Radio Mayday broadcast live stream on kpfa.org. You're also potentially tuning in on Facebook on our page Pacifica Radio Mayday broadcast. That's Pacifica Radio Mayday broadcast. You can share it with your friends. Post your updates from around the world if you're tuning in. We thank you for listening. I'm Kat Petru, one of the hosts, and I'm joined by Dennis Bernstein. Both of us are from KPFA, from First Voice Apprenticeship Program and We Rise Production. And a huge shout out to everyone who's getting this going. And I wanted to say John Perulis, sorry John, from Bright Path Video for filming all of this. And now, hello Alice, Loaiza from Task Force on the Americas, Marcha Patriótica Colombia and Venezuela. These are some things I see. So can you...
No, on Venezuela, yeah.
On Venezuela.
Yeah.
Why don't you bring us up to speed, your best understanding of what's going on now?
Well, yesterday was part of a U.S. effort to create a coup and to overthrow the government, the Bolivarian government of Venezuela, that has been going on for probably 20 years, as long as the Bolivarians exist in Venezuela. The Bolivarians came to power 20 years ago in 1999 with Chavez, and I lived at that time in Colombia, and they were a very, very important point for all of Latin America unity and Latin American struggle. So it wasn't just in Venezuela, they influenced everybody throughout the Americas. They were very important, and this of course became a problem to the U.S. because the Bolivarian ideal is to be sovereign and to reject foreign intervention in the country. So for many years, it has been a problem for the United States, and the United States has been trying to figure out how they can overthrow this very popular government. So yesterday was one point of that 20-year coup that they've been planning. And they have, their recent person is a unknown guy, named Juan Guaido, who they've pulled into the play of the coup, and he tried to convince people that he had influence in the military and was going to be able to take over the country yesterday, and it was all false. It was all orchestrated from outside, from Colombia mostly. From the U.S. Embassy in Colombia. Anyway, the people very, very wonderfully defeated that intent of coup yesterday. It was a very thrilling thing to see how they were able to defeat that and to put it down.
And it does appear that it was a failed coup. The coup leaders, one of them is now, I guess, hiding in the which embassy?
Chilean embassy.
In the Chilean embassy, trying to figure out what to do because this so-called coup turned into a little bit less than
fiasco.
Nothing.
It was. Not only that, they said that they had military the military was supporting them, And there were a few military that were bought off and supported them. And there are 25 military people in the Brazilian embassy right now asking for exile. And Lopez is trying to get out through Chile.
Sounds something like the Bay of Pigs.
It's very similar to the Bay of Pigs. It's very similar to Libya. It's very similar to many, many, many coups, to Honduras. It's very similar to Haiti. It's very similar to Guatemala. It's very similar to the long, long, long
Let's
list
see,
of
when
coups.
was the Monroe Doctrine passed? Was that 1829?
Yes.
And what did the Monroe Doctrine say? That everything south of the
Is
U.S.
ours.
border is owned by the United States. The United States has the right to do whatever it wants.
The right to do whatever
Yeah.
they want, exactly.
Let me bring, this is a good place to bring our next guest along with you, David Bacon.
Don't leave, Alice.
You stay with us. David Bacon, welcome to this special international KPFA.org broadcast stream live, brought to you by the Apprenticeship Program and lots of people who love free speech radio. Welcome. What brings you out? What's at the core on this May Day for you?
Well, this is my third May Day demonstration today, just in the East Bay here. So,
Wow.
All right.
with
We're taking some photographs.
Well, you know, they had one early this morning here in the same place with building trades unions, construction workers unions, who are protesting the fact that 90% of that new construction we see all around us in Oakland, all that gentrification, those cranes going up, is all non-union. So it means low wages and people who aren't getting, you know, the same kinds of benefits that people would get if they had a union. And then we had another one out in the port with the Longshore Union, and they're protesting the A's, that they want to build a ballpark at where the Howard Street terminal is. And I know you know about this because I was listening to Clarence Thomas earlier today on KPFA talking about what a scam that is. But so I mean, Longshore Union, they come out every May Day because it's part of the culture of the union. But this May Day, there was a special reason for doing it. In fact, they marched down to the building where the Port Commission has its office. And there was this guy from the Port Commission that stood up on the back of the flatbed truck and tried to talk to the crowd about what the Port Commission was supposedly doing the right thing, and the people there were basically having none of it. And so now here we are with this, I think, what has now become the traditional May Day celebration in the Bay Area, which is since 2006, immigrant rights organizations and immigrant communities coming out with progressive people and union people.
Could you talk about the intersection between immigrants' rights and union rights and how that works together and the importance of that synergy?
Well, I think that when you talk to people about why people come out here on May Day, and have been since 2006, I think it's that people want their rights. So, okay, what rights is it that people want? Well, clearly the right to be here. You know, the right to be safe, the right to have your family free from the threat of being separated, the right of being free from deportation, the right to be here. But people also talk about, you know, the right to stay home. Homeless possibly being, you know, San Miguel Cuevas in Oaxaca. So what changes have to take place in order for people to be able to, the right to stay home? And then, if you're going to be here, we all have to work, especially if you're an immigrant who is here. So why is it the immigrant workers get condemned to that part of the workforce that has the lowest wages, the least secure jobs, the most contracted out, you know, the worst conditions? So people want a decent life.
Yeah.
And I think those, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. And I wanted Alice to give you a chance because you gave us this really helpful update on what's going on the ground in Venezuela. But also I wanted to have you share more about what brings you here today specifically.
Well, specifically today, I've been here as a participant in the organizing of the event, working with that. And I think
With
it's
Oakland Sin Fronteras?
Oakland Sin Fronteras, yes. And I work with Marcha Patriótica in Colombia.
Yeah, tell
And-
us more about that.
Yeah, Marcha Patriótica is a coalition group of different groups in Colombia, different parties in Colombia, that was part of the peace process. We worked many years with peasant groups and peasant organizations, the unification of the movement in Colombia, which was very difficult after the 90s. And we were able to form CONAP, which is a coordination of peasant groups within Colombia. And right now, Colombia is fighting paramilitarism, fighting the right-wing government, and has 7 military bases, U.S. military bases in Colombia. And there was a general strike on Thursday of last week. There's a lot going on in Colombia, but nobody knows about it, nobody hears about it. And there's a lot of solidarity with Venezuela and the struggle in Venezuela. And a lot of criticism of how the government in Colombia, which is a right-wing government, is supporting the U.S. and trying to promote the coup in Venezuela, instead of attending the problems at home in Colombia of the extreme poverty and the violence.
When you say, what do you say when sort of the Trump administration and leadership in Washington say that this president is corrupt? It's obvious that the people want to get rid of him. They don't want him anymore. And there's this Bolivarian revolution is standing in the way of the future of the people of Venezuela.
Oh, it's all a lie. People are very, very supportive of Maduro and very supportive of the Bolivarian revolution. What the people who are not are generally tend to be the middle class and the upper class people in the country, which has happened. The same thing has happened in Colombia. And sometimes the people are not so middle class, but they're convinced because the massive, massive media barrage of right-wing media owned by the U.S. and constructed and orchestrated by the U.S. all over the world convinces people through TV shows, through telenovelas, through all kinds of ways, through news. And so they constantly convince people that their interests are not really their interests.
Boy, does that sound familiar.
Doesn't it?
It's the same structure here, no?
It's the same thing here.
How the people who did vote for Trump did, why they voted, because of all of the storytelling, because of the way in which our corporatized media tells the story of the people who buy them, buy it, right?
But to answer that also, I wanted to say that Maduro was elected. He's a legally of the most transparent elections in all of Latin America.
You say he was elected, yes.
He was elected legally. And the problem with the U.S. is that the people didn't vote the way the U.S. wanted. So that's why he's become
a target of the United States government and the coup, and it clearly is a coup. David, I want your response to the coup. We're calling it on Flashpoints a failed coup by the United States government. Your thoughts on that?
Well, sure I do. I think that it is one of a long, long line of efforts by the United States to try to hold on to its domination of countries in Latin America. And Venezuela sits, by no coincidence, on top of the largest deposits of oil in the world. We have people in the Trump administration saying openly, Bolton said it, that if there were a coup in Venezuela, that the U.S. would ensure that U.S. companies were first in line to get access to the oil there. So this is really about the same kind of imperialism that all the efforts, so what's different about this than what we saw in Honduras? When Miguel Zelaya was elected president of Honduras, what was his crime that caused him to be deposed by the Honduran military with the support of Hillary Clinton and the State Department and the U.S. government? It was that he wanted to raise the minimum wage, he wanted free college education for Hondureños, and he threatened the interests of the U.S., and that was enough to cause him to, basically lose the presidency of Honduras. And I want to say, too, that by no coincidence and no accident is also part of the reason why so many people from Honduras are coming to the United States.
Absolutely. Thank you for linking, both of you. This was really interesting to hear you weave it all together. We have about 10 more minutes left in our broadcast, and we have Clarence Thomas ready to come. He just was on stage.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, we thank both of you.
David Bacon and Alice Loaiza from Task Force on the Americas. And I don't know, I feel like I should know where David came from, but I don't know.
And David Bacon, how do people follow your work and see the photography? Because you document this world in a way that's crucial.
I think the easiest way is just to Google my name, David Bacon Reality Check, and they'll find my blog, and that's where it all is.
And they'll see extraordinary photography and great journalism. We thank both of you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
for your
All right.
time and all you do.
All right, and I think we've got
Yep.
Clarence Thomas coming in here. I'm Dennis Bernstein, and who are you?
Oh, I'm Kat Petru.
We're here together. It's May Day, downtown.
International Workers Day.
International Workers Day, downtown Oakland, in what we call Oscar Grant Plaza, with a very good reason. And we'll never forget that. And we've got a gentleman here we'll also never forget. Well, why don't you introduce yourself, sir? Tell us who you are and what you're doing down here with your ILWU shirt on.
Okay, first of all,
There
He
you
needs some
go.
headphones.
Now you can hear us.
Clarence Thomas, third generation longshore worker, ILW Local 10, retired from the waterfront, but obviously not from the struggle. My family has sustained itself since 1944 through our association with ILW. My grandfather was a member of Local 10 starting in 1944.
Nice.
And it's wonderful. This has been a tremendous day. I was mentioning to someone earlier that the building trades had a May Day event here this morning at 8:30. ILW Local 10, Local 3491, had May Day actions at Howard Terminal at the Port of Oakland, where the Oakland A's are attempting to build a baseball park. We are opposed to that. We see this not only as an attack on longshore workers, but on the working class, because there's some 70,000 workers whose jobs can be traced to the Port of Oakland. It's the economic engine for the Northern California region. It generates some $64 billion annually. It's the third busiest port on the West Coast, and the idea that a billionaire like John Fisher would propose to build a baseball stadium there is an indication of the crisis of capitalism. And what I mean by that is that the crisis has created not only contradictions between the working class and the ruling class, but the capitalist class themselves, because a billionaire wants to interfere with the economic engine for the whole entire Northern California region to build a ballpark. And guess what? He's using the fear of the Oakland A's leaving the Bay Area. But something that the listening audience may not know is that this trend by professional sport franchise owner to move toward the water, toward port areas, is not limited to what's happening here. There are attempts to do the same thing in Seattle, where they want to bring back the Seattle Supersonic basketball team, and they're eyeing the port. And they also are eyeing the port at the Port of Portland, Oregon. This is a strategy, and we have to understand what it is. It's privatization of public resources.
Privatization.
And the politicians are going along with it because that's where they get their funding from. And they're making telling these fairy tales, because today, if you were at the port, you either saw or you heard light rail, Amtrak, or industrial rail carrying containers, or trucks picking up a recycled metal from Schnitzer. That was happening today while we were having our rally. This is what would be happening during the course of a baseball game. The whole thing is absolutely ludicrous, but it's very dangerous because it could make the Port of Oakland wind up looking just like the Embarcadero in San Francisco. That used to be the busiest port on the West Coast, but the San Francisco city fathers and mothers decided that they no longer wanted to have shipping. They wanted real estate development. And so that's what you have now. 2 passenger terminals at the Embarcadero. We don't want to see a couple of terminals here at the Port of Oakland, the port of last resort. This could happen within the next 10 years if we are not vigilant about this. This is privatization.
We don't have much time, but I'm curious if you can share some of the tactics you and other folks are using to resist.
Well, let me just say this. loose lips sink ships. But I will say that today, at our second rally, we had a representative of the Port of Oakland to come out to speak to the rank and file. And he found it very difficult to deal with 500 people with questions. But let me just say this to you. We have the power at the point of production. And not only that, but longshore workers are not limited just to the West Coast or to the Gulf or to the East Coast. We're international.
Thank you, Clarence Thomas. I see you, Miguel. Miguel Gavilan Molina just joined us.
We appreciate all the great work over many years. We appreciate it.
And thank you, Dennis. You're doing a wonderful job. And we appreciate the work you did for May Day today.
All right, well, we keep going. Thank you. Dennis Bernstein here. We're delighted to have been here for, how many hours?
We've been here for 2 hours.
We got Miguel here who's going to help us close as well.
Yeah, Miguel, did you want to say anything? I've got a list of names I'd love to read. All right, I'll read these names. So a huge shout out to our crew. Frank Sterling, executive producer, and Steve Zeltzer, executive producer. Myself, Kat Petru, and Nicole Gervasio from We Rise Production. We did the social media production for this. Tova Fry, our liaison from Oakland Sin Fronteras. All of the First Voice apprentices out here producing sound and equipment. Miss M, our executive sound engineer. Shaquille Stewart, engineer. Hannah Wilson and Mari Nakagawa doing line production and engineering as well, and Kendall Krakow for her field production. John Perulis from Bright Path Video doing camera and live stream. This is a long list. I'm almost done. Dennis, of course, from Flashpoint. Thank you so much for hosting with me. Sharon Peterson of First Voice Media, who was hosting earlier in the hour, along with Miguel Gavilan Molina.
Miguel, say goodbye.
Sí se puede.
And thank you to all of our guests. Happy May Day, folks.
Bye-bye.
Flags off of coffins, man, this ain't our war. Colonized and terrorized by the world's biggest killers. The U.S. government, the biggest weapon and drug dealers. Filling prisons with children incarcerating the future. My space